Okie dokie. We also want to encourage you to take a look at two specific hashtags. This is a, a meetup that is not only about accessibility, but also inclusive design. So we are very passionate about, sorry, there's a train going by my house. One sec. I should have closed the window so you wouldn't hear it. That's fine. We want to really encourage you to take a look at two hashtags that specifically center disabled Black voices. Those are Disabled Black Talk and Disabled Black Lives Matter on Twitter. You should definitely take a listen and amplify those voices with the platform you have. And now to the main event. I'm going to read you this lovely intro about Kathleen, and then I'm going to let Kathleen take it away. So Kathleen, pronouns she, her, is a full stack engineer with a design background. In other words, she really enjoys the front of the front end, digging into new technologies and talking about accessibility, React component libraries, design systems, and inclusive documentation. She is also a Color Module Specification Editor for the W3C's Design Tokens Community Group. And when not coding, designing, or speaking about things, which is a lot already, Kathleen is the best Lanterne Rouge cyclocrosser you'll ever meet. Kathleen, you sound really cool. I'm excited to hear your talk. And we do also have your Twitter on here too. If you're live tweeting along, you can tag Kathleen. Kathleen's Twitter account is resource11. That's resource11. And that's all I have. Kathleen, I think you're good to take it away.
Wonderful. Oh, good. Now I can share my screen.
Yeah.
And we're going to share the screen and then start the presentation. Here we go. So, and I have to hide all y'all in your thumbnails, or I won't be able to see my notes and stay on track. So, going back. Come on. Previous slide. Oh, that's interesting. There we go. All right. Take two. So, welcome everyone. My name is Kathleen McMahon. My pronouns are she and her. With a tickle in my throat tonight, so bear with me. And I'm here today to show you how accessibility flavored React components can make your design system delicious. Before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. I know that there's a slide deck posted for the Ali Chai speaker deck URL, but if you also need a copy where you have speaker notes, and I also have some links to resources, I have also a copy here for anyone that needs that type of documentation at https://resource11/CB28H86. I'll also share that link at the end of the presentation and on Twitter after the meetup. Whew, that was a mouthful. You can follow me at resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. So now that we have an outline, now that we've gotten those details out of the way, wow, it's been a long day. Let's talk about what we'll be covering today. And oh yes, there is an agenda. Who doesn't have one? We'll talk about why accessibility first, design systems, they are a cookbook, design systems and React. We'll also talk about icons, buttons, inputs, and we'll sneak in a little bit, talk about disclosure widget patterns, and wrap up with some documentation tips. Before we begin, let's review who I am, a little bit of a better introduction. I am a principal engineer at Car Gurus, and I race bikes very, very badly. Mostly, you'll see me in costume racing 2 laps to year 6 at the back of the pack on a single speed. Mostly, unless something happens, like perhaps a pandemic kicking in our doors. Then your racing season is postponed. So while I'm an engineer and a super slow bike racer, I am also a dev dinosaur. And I find it fascinating to see how far we've come in terms of the tools we've had for computing and software and storage, reference materials, and browsers. Our browser choices were minimal back then. Netscape, anyone? Our stack, though, has stood the test of time. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Fast forward to now, an industry is moving at a really fast pace, and it can feel overwhelming to keep up, much less find the place where you can thrive, especially if you have both design and engineering skills, and especially if you love that fundamental stack. But fear not. Dinosaurs are always the hotness. Those old school HTML, CSS, JavaScript skills are highly valuable and transferable, no matter which framework or library you happen to use. And those skills will give you an edge in the industry where the div has become the reluctant king. So before working at CarGurus, I was the tech lead for the O'Reilly Media Design System team. I learned a lot about streamlining component libraries during my time there. If you've ever worked on a design system, you know there are a lot of things to consider. And great design systems combine two key factors: user experience and the end user experience. However, like herding cats, creating a great design system can be tough with so many moving parts. If you happen to be rebooting a design system from a previous version, you'll have to choose what to tackle first. If your design system team is small, you'll have to be very strategic. For example, if you have any business logic in your components, your first priority should be to extract those out and build with accessibility in mind. Fix your colors, fix your components, then reboot your docs. You may ask, why accessibility first? Well, our users have varied needs, and because so often accessibility is what is handled last. And that sends a poor message to our users. If you've read the Web A Million report, the results are depressing. With the amount of errors found on pages, 97.8%. Unlabeled inputs, 59%. And 60.1% of unnecessary ARIA attributes added to the page. We are making the web worse in the name of good intentions. While we have things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to follow, which really sets a really low bar to pass, we have been missing the mark in the industry when it comes to making sure all of our users can use our apps. Imagine, though, if you had accessibility baked into some commonly used components. A design system is the perfect place for this. I like to say your design system is a cookbook, and cookbooks have a personality. My mom is a serious fan of cooking, and lately I've been digging into her cookbooks that she's collected over the years to read how recipes have evolved over time. If you happen to take a look at some of the cookbooks published in the 1940s through 60s and look past those outdated views on women, you'll find some interesting recipes, questionable food combinations that included Jell-O with shellfish, yum, but also an impressive level of detail paid to the structure of every single part of the cooking process. There is even a section on table settings and entertaining. This is very similar to how a design system works. Now, what does that have to do with React? Well, there's always some debate about how using a JavaScript library or framework creates inaccessible apps. Yet, if you look at the React's documentation, React states that they fully support building accessible websites by using standard HTML and CSS techniques. They don't say that, but I'm shoving it in there. A better way to think of React is to consider it a kitchen utensil. It's not the only utensil in your kitchen. You are the cook. In my opinion, it's up to the developer to know those standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and accessibility best practices to be able to leverage a utensil correctly, and that includes React. That said, if your developers are unsure how to start building inclusive apps, empower them with your design system. Build some features into your components to help them along. Then you can start celebrating when your coworkers make those apps accessible without you having to ask for it. Now, components, they are your tried and true recipes, and WCAG is your reference material. Creating a component is like following a recipe. First, you start off with high quality ingredients. That's your semantic HTML. You mix in your seasonings, just a touch of ARIA attributes. Follow the directions, your documentation, and provide helpful hints as best practices. Let's take those principles and apply them to some components. Starting with icons. Icons can be either informative or decorative. Informative icons need to be paired with descriptive text to be perceivable by screen readers. Decorative icons need to be hidden from screen readers because they don't add enough significant value to your app to be announced. But wait, icons can be interpreted in so many different ways. True. For example, you may say the heart symbol used to favorite something in an app. Other apps may use a star. This leaves way too much up to interpretation by the user. Ideally, you should be pairing any icons you use that are informative with visible text. This way, users will have a clear context on the purpose of that icon. Of course, there is a big but here because, well, a big but in here. Well, sorry, I'm about to pun and I will not. I will refuse from punning about buts. But getting icons paired with visible text also depends on the buy-in you get from your team and the organization for particular icon usage in your designs. And it depends on whether you can get a design approved that uses a label paired with an icon like this. So this is the ideal scenario. But in general terms, there is more than one way to create an accessible icon. Two of the most recent ways are SVGs and icon fonts. At O'Reilly, we initially used SVG icons in our design system combined into a sprite sheet. Yet we ran into some problems when we started testing. We discovered a bug when testing in Safari on the High Sierra operating system, where VoiceOver would announce every single one of those 100 or so icons in that sprite sheet. It made me sad, like Natalie Portman crying in the corner. So we had to think fast to find a different solution. Remember, small team. So icon fonts to the rescue. We converted all our icons into a font set for the time being and chose to revisit SVG icons later, since that High Sierra bug has now been fixed. Let's go over an example of how to make an accessible icon component using semantic HTML and the icon font technique. So this is what you'll typically see as an icon font pattern in the wild, but it's not accessible. This is an accessible icon pattern. Let's break it down. The span containing our icon font has been sprinkled with a pinch of ARIA hidden equals true to hide the icon font from our screen readers. The second span contains the descriptive name for our icon and has a visually hidden class added to it. This removes the visual presentation of that text, yet keeps that text available for screen readers. In the wrapping span, we use a CSS class to convert the span's native display property from inline to inline block. This will allow us to support margin and padding customization on all four sides of the element. Notice that we're using spans all the way down for all of these elements. This is done on purpose for when we pair this component with a button. Now, before we refactor this pattern into React syntax or JSX syntax, let's consider whether this icon is informative or decorative. If our icon is informative, we keep the markup as is because informative icons should announce. if our icon is decorative, we'd add this aria hidden attribute to the wrapping span and set it to true to ensure the entire group is not announced by a screen reader. Now that we have an accessible icon pattern, let's pop this into a functional component in React and convert this syntax to JSX. You're going to change that class to class name, convert that true string to a Boolean value, and self-close that empty span. And voila, now this is a static icon component in JSX syntax. Let's make this component more flexible though, and expand that syntax to support incoming props like icon hidden, icon name, icon title, and add some guardrails. It's important to create guardrails for your components so you can always be sure that your developers are using the accessibility features that you've mixed in. For our icon component, we've added 3 guardrails. The first guardrail we've added is to set up a check if the icon name the dev passes in to our component exists in our icon library. If that icon does not exist in our library, the component does not render in the app. The second guardrail we've set here is to ensure if the developer doesn't pass in descriptive text to that icon title prop, the icon's default name will always be exposed to screen readers as fallback. The last guardrail is the icon hidden prop. This one ensures that if the developer passes in icon hidden true here, the containing span will render in the DOM with an aria hidden equals true attribute attached. If no icon hidden prop is passed in, the aria hidden attribute isn't attached to the wrapping span at all. This way, we are guaranteeing that the icon will read out to screen readers no matter what, unless the developer specifies purposely otherwise by passing in that icon hidden value. This true or null pattern works very well with HTML attributes that only need to be added if the value exists to support screen readers that are modern screen readers and I believe older screen readers. Aria hidden is one of those attributes. You may still be saying, what about SVGs? What if I haven't rolled my own icon set? Well, there are great options out there to do this with SVGs as well. For example, Font Awesome is still a great option. In fact, Font Awesome now has an official React component that you can use. And it has been built with accessibility in mind. Hooray. It's pretty straightforward to use this component, and it adds the right properties for you under the hood by default. There is a slight bug if you want to use this component as a standalone informative icon though. Say you want the icon to announce as a beverage in this case, and you pass in an aria label prop to the Font Awesome icon component. Yes, that aria label will render. However, because the SVG element already has an aria hidden attribute attached on that SVG element, that aria label will do nothing here. However, you can get around this by using the icon component we built and swapping out the span that used the CSS class that attached our icon font and swap in that Font Awesome component instead. Then you can leverage that visually hidden span to make sure your icon is informative. Moving on to buttons. Buttons perform an action on the page. Buttons should look and act like a button, not a link. Don't get me started on that. Buttons will get screen reader and keyboard functionality for free. It's amazing. Our high quality ingredient here is the button element. We will sprinkle an aria label prop here, well, attribute, to support instances where we have multiple buttons with the same name on the page to give context to screen reader users. Like those times, here comes my cat, like those times when you have 10 read more buttons on the page. With this label, you know that this button allows you to read more about dinosaurs. Also, notice It's important that when you're using an ARIA label in this way to match the first words of the ARIA label with the words in the button text to support voice recognition software. If your app needs to support localization, Adrian Roselli recently wrote a great article with a different pattern that uses the ARIA described by attribute. That article will be shared in the resources. This is an accessible button in JSX. If we want to support button text with icons, we mix in our icon component. And we wrap the button context in a span for positioning. Note here, we are using inline level elements inside the button children. We should not be nesting things like other buttons, other links, or other controls inside a button's children. That is not valid HTML. Also, this is why we had those spans. Remember those spans? Because spans are inline level elements, we are cool here. Same thing with, if someone remember a div? The div that has no semantics? Div renders implicitly as a block level element. This is why spans instead of divs belong in a button. This JSX is popped into the components render method, and we add some props here. We're going to add the onClick handler to support whatever function the developer wants to pass in, and we're going to add some disabled button support using that true or null pattern. The one guardrail we add here will ensure that if no icon name is passed in, no icon will render in this button. Inputs. Inputs need labels and error messages because label inputs give all users more context. And no, placeholders are not labels. Avoid using placeholders instead of labels because your users will lose context of where they are. Placeholders are hard to style across browsers. Thank you, Eric Bailey. And placeholders are not auto-translated. We built our component to input components to minimize horizontal scrolling. And we stacked our labels above the input error message. We stack our input labels above the input and the error messages below the input to support screen magnification. I can speak. To support screen magnification users. Also, you can place the error message right below the label for even better discoverability if you want. There is an article by Adam Silver that talks about that. He has great articles about forms. Now, this is an accessible input pattern. It's a bit hard to read, so let's zoom in. We start with our high quality ingredients and pair our labels and error messages to the input. In JSX, we associate our label with the input by pairing the label's HTML for prop with the input's ID value. We're going to mix in some key ARIA spices for validation. We're going to add ARIA invalid, ARIA required, and pair that ARIA described by value with the error text ID values. We'll also add an ARIA live equals polite attribute to the error message span to make sure that errors are announced to screen readers immediately at a convenient stopping point. To make this component even more flexible, we're going to mix in some disabled attribute support and some synthetic event support like on-change and on-key press handlers to capture keyboard actions. We are using that true or null handling pattern here as well. Add your guardrails. If your dev does not pass in a label, the whole input will not render, neither will the icon. This will help guide the developer to follow best practices when implementing a component, especially an input. And this will soon become second nature when a developer is creating any type of input. They'll know to pair input with a label. So it's a great muscle memory to establish. Now, the same goes for error handling. If the developer does not pass in both the invalid prop and the error message to the component, the error message will not render. Fancy and new, disclosure widgets. A disclosure widget is an interactive pattern that uses a button to control the visibility of a section of content. This pattern is great because of that flexibility and because it's keyboard and mouse operable, and its base functionality is very similar for more than one type of interactive component. Some common patterns are nav menus, toggle tips, and settings disclosures. Other types of widget patterns are custom select menus and autocompletes, which we will not be talking about those today because in addition to needing enter, spacebar, and escape key functionality, those two patterns also need up, down arrow keys and home end key support. And autocomplete also needs to be paired with an input. One important thing to note, a tooltip is not a toggle tip. Those interactions are completely different. A tooltip's interactivity revolves around hovering over the tool tip and maybe focusing on it with a keyboard. This can be problematic for any sort of touch device which doesn't support hover, like a non-mouse pointer or an eye tracker. Also, anyone using a screen magnifier may accidentally dismiss a tooltip by moving their field of view and hovering away. And in my resources, Sarah M. Higley. She is the person to watch and listen to about tooltips. She has a lot of opinions and good patterns. The three primary interactions we will focus on here are the spacebar and enter key functionality, which comes natively when you use a button to open a disclosure, and the escape key. And we're also going to handle mouse clicks. For special cases like a search menu that toggles into view when you press the button, you can optionally send focus to the first item in the open container with the pattern I'm going to show you. So let's take a look at a disclosure widget pattern in Code Sandbox. So I'm going to open up the browser, and I have this Code Sandbox to share later, and I'm going to hide the floating meeting controls. Yes, thank you. Okay, so here is the disclosure widget pattern. So you have things for React. You're importing React, some hooks for creating refs and state and effects, basically some lifecycle hooks, and we're also importing using a button in here. So we're going to pair a button down here. I'm going to show you just what returns. Basically, you have a wrapper div and a button, and a div here that is a container for whatever you're going to pass into this disclosure widget. And if I click on something with my mouse, I clicked on that button again and again, as you can see, this pattern opens and closes. Also, if I click over here and hit the tab key and then hit the space bar, look, keyboard functionality, how amazing. And now I can also do the same thing with the entered key. Amazing. And if I hit the escape key, please don't break anything. So yes, of course, I'm going to keep those tools apparently. Thanks. That is the beauty of Zoom. Zoom sometimes hijacks your key commands. So I'm going to see if it works. Yes. So as long as I keep these tools up here, I can use my window. So if I hit expose my disclosure widget and hit escape, look at this. The widget closes and the focus stays back to the button that opens the widget. It's pretty cool. To make this pattern, so we have a button that is grabbing a bunch of, hello, Otis. Go over here, over here, over here. Good boy. Otis has entered the building. Okay, so over here we have a bunch of attributes that we want for the button. The ARIA attributes we have is ARIA expanded to control whether the button is opened or closed. If ARIA expanded is true, the button will, the container will be open. Also, we have this aria has pop-up attribute to let this button know that it is attached to this div. Otis, stop it. My cat is hijacking my conversation over here. I also have a ref to have a reference for this button to this div. And this extra classes is a way that you can override classes using CSS modules into this button. So we can style this as we see fit, pass in whatever icon we want into our button component, whether we want to have an icon only button. We can pass in an on-click handler and basically toggle the button open and also do other things if we want. And we can pass in what if we want to have a large or small or medium button, which is great. And in this div shows the children only if it is open. So this is controlled by some state up here. So right here, we have establishing our state, making some refs so we can talk to our button, and we have some handlers. We have handler for if the button has toggled this open and someone has pressed either the escape key. It has pressed the escape key. We are going to close the button and send focus right back to this button. This function will toggle the button open and close and will basically toggle the state to true or false. This click outside handler, and by the way, this pattern is inspired by Marcy Sutton's Front-End Masters course on accessible JavaScript. She had a great pattern for this that I took and expanded to make it more of a flexible component versus a one-off. So she has really, really great techniques that you should look at. We also have this function here, a click outside handler. So if you happen to have this disclosure widget open and you click outside, it will close it for you. And it removes focus, which is great. And it also resets the state for you. So it's a really nice pattern to like reset your state. We also have some event listeners for mouse up and key up to listen for that click outside handler. And we also have a function here that if we say that the first item is going to need focus, if we pass that into our component, we can focus to set focus to that item. And also we have some cleanup functions. And here also a function to, when you unmount the component, to remove any event listeners. Now, so this is the general pattern. What we can do though, in our app, we have that disclosure widget and we have it here. So we're passing in that widget. We also have 3 other widgets that use this as a basis. So for example, let me hide this one. Make sure everything is working. And I'm going to show you first. I'm going to show you the toggle tip. So the toggle tip code, making sure everything wraps, is in the toggle tip pattern. It pulls in that disclosure widget, and I'm inside the div. I am inside the just the widget here. I am passing in a div with a paragraph. And so I just pass in whatever I want and style it as whatever I want. And it's fantastic because what I can do is over here, everything is good. So if I'm just going to show you all 3 of them at once. Yay. Okay. So over here, this one over here to the right, this is our toggle tip. Look at this. This is used this disclosure widget under the hood. And I want to keep this nice and big so everyone can see it. But look at this. Mouse, keyboard, glorious. The next one I'm going to show you is this one here, the settings disclosure. What if you have things like you have a menu where you want to toggle on some settings? Like for here, we have the widget and we put on an unordered list, and I mapped an unordered list with buttons in there. So with this pattern, I'm going to do it with my keyboard. Click to open it. Look at this. You can select, your grape. And then if you hit escape, it goes right back to the button that opened it. So another pretty nice pattern. The last pattern I want to show you is a search widget pattern. And what this one does is in here, wrap the text in here. In this disclosure widget, we're passing in a form that has an input and a button. So a search input and a button that will make this particular pattern. And notice, look at how it passed in the focus right into that search input. That is because we passed in here, input ref equals, first item ref. Just by doing that here and here and here, basically creating a ref at the beginning of your function call. So you declare the search widget, declare your function, create a ref, set it to null, pass it into your widget, and also pass it into your input. And what's great is when you open this, it sends focus right to that search menu, which is fantastic. And you hit escape, and now you have over here, way too many things. One, I have way too many things, but what is really great about this now is I have a pattern where I can go hit here, go through things, and it will go to the next one and will close the previous one. I can open this and just do things with this one pattern and basically expand it for many uses. So that is pretty cool. Now I'm going to get back to the presentation and wrap this up. So back to the presentation. Documentation. Those massive design systems out there definitely have some drool-worthy patterns for us to dream about. If your team is small, though, showing examples of the many ways your component can be used is a good first step. When we were rebooting our docs about a year and a half ago, we used Gatsby for our style guide to leverage the power of MDX because MDX was pretty new and Storybook was pretty new. We also used Storybook to document our component playground. We also deployed static instances of our docs using Zeit's Now product, which has now been renamed Vercel and now has ruined all my now puns about the software. I can't call it later anymore. Moving on. I want to touch on Storybook for a moment. Storybook is a fantastic way to sandbox your components on isolation and play with UI logic without the complexities of business logic. And now Storybook supports MDX as well, which is fantastic. You could use Storybook theoretically for a one-stop shop for your documentation. The accessibility add-on here is a must for Storybook. That add-on uses the Axe core engine under the hood and does a quick audit of your components, identifies the errors, tells you how serious they are, and gives you steps to fix them before you start your manual accessibility testing process. When documenting your components, you should add helpful hints to allow your developers to know how to use your components. For example, how to make an informative icon or a decorative icon. Be sure to add props tables to your components so your developers know which prop does what and whether it's required. Add those component do's and don'ts as well. Those are essential because it is so possible to make accessible components and use them inaccessibly. Dedicate a page to accessibility resources and add all those links that you have curated. The WCAG success criteria is intense to parse. Make it more straightforward for your design system users to learn how to build with accessibility in mind and show them how to implement common accessibilities by adding this to your documentation. So, to wrap up, our users are diverse. Your design system is a cookbook. Cookbooks have a personality. React is a kitchen utensil. You are the cook. Components are your tried and true recipes. WCAG is your reference material. and document, document, document it all. And remember, dinosaurs are always the hotness. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. That was so amazing. Everybody's been saying in the chat it was so wonderful and informative, and we also have folks from YouTube as well that have enjoyed this. So we certainly appreciate your knowledge and bringing all of this information about design systems specifically as it pertains to React. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to remind folks, please do ask questions. It's so very thorough that I didn't see any questions along the way, but if folks just want to throw the questions in the chat, or certainly at this point you can unmute yourself and just ask the questions. We would love to hear from you right now.
I'm going to also exit so I can see the questions being written. I'm a visual person. Stop sharing first. Stop sharing. Now I can see questions.
I've got a question, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely. Ask away.
So Kathleen, could you expand a little bit more on the sort of the consequences of not following the true or null pattern? Maybe a more specific example would be sort of taking the case of ARIA hidden versus ARIA expanded.
Yes. So ARIA hidden, for example, ideally, I mean, if you had ARIA hidden, you'd want to either have, all right, so if you want to hide something, you would put in ARIA hidden equals true, right? That would hide the wrap, anything that is a child of that, like it would hide the wrapping span in any of the children inside there. I remember some conversations with, I believe, Scott O'Hara, where he mentioned that there were some old screen readers that if you happen to, I used to do ARIA hidden equals true or ARIA hidden equals false. And he was mentioning that some old screen readers, if you even had a value in the ARIA hidden attribute attached to your element in the DOM, it would still, it would hide things. So, so those certain attributes where it should be like, ARIA hidden equals true or ARIA hidden or input checked, it should be just added onto the element or not at all. So you don't confuse any of the older assistive technology that will, behave unexpectedly. With ARIA expanded, because ARIA expanded is a true or false thing. So that one would not qualify for true or null pattern. But you wouldn't want to, like in your button component, you wouldn't want to add, you want to make sure that that particular ARIA expanded attribute is not added to your button unless you are using it, as part of something with like a disclosure pattern. You know what I mean? You don't want to attach it at all unless it's the purpose of that. Therefore, you could add that. You could add that actually, you can add the ARIA expanded attribute, like the ARIA expanded prop to your button. And in your prop types, you could have 3 prop types: true, false, or null, and default it to null. And that way, it doesn't attach unless you, pass in true or false, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
We also have a question in the chat. There's a lot of awareness growing in this space. What is the best way to learn the fundamentals? Do you have recommended resources?
Oh, yes. One of them is the accessibility project, so a11yproject.com. And that has been a really good resource over the years. It's just undergone a redesign with Eric Bailey, Tatiana Mack, and a whole bunch of very seriously talented people. I have a whole bunch of links in the resources on my deck that I've shared that I can, hold on. I'm going to put it right in here, but I'm also going to put it in Twitter. So https and stop capitalizing it. But of course, Zoom will do this. noti.st .resource 11. And in there, I will be sharing later like the full URL, which will have my presentation with all the links. I think I have about 20 of them. So there will be like accessibility project is a place to learn. I learn a lot on Twitter by following a lot of people. DQ is a good place to learn about some tips. The Paciello group, nobility. Fable Labs is a place for like real testing with, user testing with real users with disabilities that will give you the best feedback that you'll ever ever get, because you're getting real feedback. Smash Magazine does, some good articles. Someone named Eric Bailey, who happens to be the audience, tends to write a lot. I tend to bookmark a lot of his stuff. Marcy Sutton is a big name to follow. Scott O'Hara. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. Ireadeade. I don't. It's like very long name. Very good articles. It's like, yeah, look at my resources. Yes. She and her. Another person that's been talking about EJ Mason. He has some interesting talks. He has interesting perspectives. So I would learn from him. Yeah. There's more that I'm not thinking of right now, but yes. Carrie Fisher. I could go on. Oh wait, Carrie Fisher. Do you know her? Lainey Feingold. Everyone that spoke at Accessibility Toronto last week, all of them. Let's see. I think Jen Lukers, she'll talk a bit about React.
I don't see React in your contacts.
And
who do you want to send it to?
Apparently Siri has some opinions. I see another question though. An example of using a span for loading your icons. If there are downsides to using an image element to display your icon. So when I was using a span to load the icons, what I did there was we took our SVG icons and we ran it through a tool and converted each of the icons into a font set. So those icons were being loaded as fonts. So we had like the wrapper span, which was wrapping around the first span that contained the CSS would attach the icon font, and the second span that would be that descriptive text that was visually hidden for the icon. In terms of images, for when you were using the SVG, the SVG pattern when using the React Font Awesome icon, I believe that SVG had a role of image in there, and that was following some particular SVG best practices. There is an article by Carrie Fisher that I put in my resources of all the different ways that she has tested SVGs, like different patterns and different ways of using SVGs accessibly. And she has a whole grid on like how each of the techniques announce in various screen readers. So there's some ways of why, if you're making an SVG and using a role of image, you would have to do some other things to either make it announce or not, if that answers your question.
Thank you for answering that. And it looks like we're getting a more intimate group, so feel free, folks, to take yourselves off of mute if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask.
I'm gonna nerd out a little bit and do a little more. I've been playing with my, you probably didn't see it when I was talking. I had this behind me, the lighting scenes that would change every 15 minutes. You probably missed all of that. So I'm going to change one more of them. Okay, we're going to go back to fall foliage. If it will do it. Maybe it won't, but it won't. It lies to me. Lies.
What kind of lighting system is it, just out of curiosity?
It's Hue lighting, and probably because I have that one not connected to the right Wi-Fi. So I have Hue light strips, and I have been having a great time just playing. It entertains me. So now we're gonna try it. All right, are we ready? Fall foliage.
Ah, lovely.
Honolulu. Green.
That looks
but
like
really
a new toy that I need to invest in.
Yes.
Looks like we have
I had to play with some lighting a little bit.
Connor has a specific question, but is worried about monopolizing your time. And Eric wants to know if you have a blog, so please respond to
Okay, so the quick question is, do I have a blog? Yes, I do. It's kathleenmcmahon.dev. Right now, it has about 9 to 10 posts about how I did the 100 Days of Gatsby and talked a little bit about MDX. I also did a post, which is, it's on there. It's cross-posted, which was on accessibility, 24 accessibility, and also on my blog post about how CSS and fonts and relative units, how they're still a big deal right now in CSS. Like, please don't use pixels for fonts. And why? There it is. Thanks, Nick. Connor, what is your question?
Yeah, so I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about the behavior of input errors, particularly related to the ARIA Live polite behavior. So if you have a form that fails on submission with multiple errors, will it read out all of the errors, or just the first one, or just the last one?
Okay, so this is more of like that ARIA Live equals polite attribute that we put on that span that contained the error message. That created a live region. So what it does is, if there were any errors in each of the inputs, first, ideally you have them like paired with each of the inputs, and sometimes you also group them in a section, where you could also there's two ways you could do it. You could have have the inputs above and below the errors, and so they show up, but also have them in a separate region, all in one bucket. And you could put in a live region for that one area that contains all the errors, and you could have an ARIA Live equals polite onto that one bucket, and will announce all of them when you try to submit and it fails. You could, when the minute those errors show up in that container that says ARIA Live equals polite, they will announce. So it's up to you of when you want those to show up.
Okay. So
yeah.
If I had a form that had two inputs, first name, last name, and I just click submit right away, and they had individual errors beneath each one of them, would both of those get read by a screen reader?
If you put that that ARIA live like the ARIA Live announcement on each of the on your input component error message. So that is one way you can do it. Another way you could do it is not have an ARIA Live attribute on that error span, and have a separate area in your form that collects all the errors, like a copy of all the errors in one region, and it will announce. What ARIA Live will do will announce the changes in that region. So whenever there's new text, there will be it'll be announced. But I think you might have to add ARIA Live equals polite, and then I think, is it ARIA additions equals true for that? So we'll be listening for changes for new text.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, now I know why my other cat isn't meowing, because I closed him in the bedroom. Which is good, because he's so persistent. Whenever I get on a call, he gets really loud. Poor kitty. The mighty Thor. But there's Otis. Otis is up there hanging out. That was the one that was walking in front of me during the whole presentation. It was great. He's very content.
Yeah. Looks like we don't have any more questions, and we only have about 3 minutes left. So just to wrap it up, thank you everybody for coming. If you have one quick question that we can squeeze in the last couple minutes, then we're happy to do that. Otherwise, certainly we've appreciated you spending time with us today, and we'd love for you to come back to our next meetup. I believe, Nick, you can confirm. I think we're going to have one next month. Is that correct? We're working on what that subject will be, and working on announcing it, so you can look for that shortly on our meetup page. Otherwise, thank you everybody for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.
This was fun.
A great presentation. We really appreciate it.
Oh,